Hello everyone, my name is feeper, and today I'm going to be talking about my take on the changes to Paladin in Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. This isn't meant to be a guide on the job, this is just my overall thoughts on how it plays, what I think should be changed, and how I feel it stacks up to the other tanks. So, without further ado, let's jump in. So just like in my last video, I'll be starting out with the rotation and the offensive capabilities of the job. Also, like in the Gunbreaker video, I won't be talking about the tank roll actions just because all the tanks have access to them, so I'm not going to cover that here. So for the rotation, Paladin sort of has two phases to his rotation. There's the fight or flight phase, or like your physical phase, and then there's the requiescat phase, or your spell phase. This is largely the same as it was in Stormblood, but you do get a few new abilities to use for each phase. The rotation essentially boils down to keeping up Goring Blade, which is your dot, and switching between your Holy Spirit Confiteor spam and your Royal Authority Atonement spam. You also generate 5 shield gauge for every auto attack that you land, which can be spent on certain abilities. Quick note about openers. In Stormblood, it was generally better to open with Fight or Flight because during your Holy Spirit spam you didn't auto attack because you were actually casting. Now, since you instant cast under Requiescat, I could be wrong, but I think it's better to open with Holy Spirit Confiteor spam because it's a higher GCD output, I believe. I could be wrong, and I don't main Paladin right now, so if someone in the comments knows, that'd be great, but I think it's better to open with Holy Spirit right now, depending on how things line up. So that's a very basic overview of the rotation. In my opinion, I think it's actually one of the best rotations in the game. Yes, it can get a bit monotonous at times, but it flows so nicely into itself, and it kind of has this like never-ending loop that just keeps going and going and going. I also really enjoy managing a dot, so it gets extra brownie points for that. Next, I'm going to go over the defensive tools that Paladin brings to the raid. First, we have Sheltron, which after level 74 is a 6-second duration of guaranteed blocks, which is about 18% damage mitigation. Now, this does consume 50 of that shield gauge or that oath gauge that I was talking about before, and has a 5-second recast. Next is Divine Veil, which once used will give you a buff, and if you get healed by anyone, including yourself, it will then spread that buff to the whole party, which will then basically give them a 10% of your maximum health shield. It lasts for 30 seconds, and this ability has a 90-second cooldown. Then there's Sentinel, which gives you 30% damage reduction for 10 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. Cover allows you to place a buff on a party member, and as long as they are within 10 yalms of you, I believe, you will instead take all of their damage for them, and this lasts for 12 seconds. This costs 50 gauge and, yet again, has a 2-minute cooldown. Intervention costs 50 gauge and reduces a party member's damage taken by 10%. Now, if you also have Rampart or Sentinel active, you then increase this effect by 50% of the amount of the buff that you have on you, so 10% or 15% respectively. This effect lasts for 6 seconds and has a 10-second recast. Next up, we have Clemency, which is a 1200 potency heal, and if you heal a party member, you also receive 50% of that healing done. Keep in mind that this is affected by the Requiescat buff. Passage of Arms is an ability that causes you to stop attacking and put these sort of wings out in a cone behind you. You block all incoming attacks during the channeling of this ability, and party members who are in the wings will only suffer 85% of the damage dealt. This lasts for 18 seconds or until you cancel it by moving, and has a 2-minute recast. And last but certainly not least, we have Hallowed Ground. This ability just straight up makes you immune to pretty much every move in the game, lasts for 10 seconds, and has a 7-minute cooldown. So that's the overview of the abilities, and now let's get into my thoughts. Just like in the last video, I will be starting with what I like first, and then kind of gradually working my way to the things that I'm not a fan of. Besides my love for this rotation and the fact that Paladin finally got a gap closer, the job is mostly a better version of its Stormblood counterpart. While Paladin didn't get many new defensive tools, really it just got changes to old abilities, it did get some nice variety in the DPS rotation, which I think it needed more. A dash of spice to the rotation is actually pretty nice, no rhyme intended, and it keeps things actually pretty engaging, at least at first. Hallowed Ground is the same, so it's still pretty amazing. Intervention is largely the same, I believe, and it's still a great tool if you're off tanking, because every 50 gauge you can just give it to the main tank, and even if you are the main tank, you can always just throw it on someone else to get a little bit of extra mitigation out. Sentinel is still great for solo boss encounters, especially for tank busters, even though in big dungeon pulls the duration does feel a little bit short, like I mentioned in the Gunbreaker video with Nebula and Dark Knight Shadow Wall. However, overall it's still a great ability. I still really like cover, but I'm a little confused as to why it costs 50 gauge and has a 2-minute cooldown. I get that it can't just cost the gauge, because that'd be pretty broken in raids, but just make it the 2-minute cooldown, like it was in Stormblood. You also didn't used to take 100% of the damage, it was only like 65% or something like that, and it just, it got nerfed, which is okay, but it just feels weird to me to cost the 50 gauge and have the cooldown. I don't know, I digress. Passage of Arms still has its uses for big AoE nukes like in trials and things, but other than that it's still kinda meh. Stopping all of your DPS to mitigate damage when your whole party probably isn't going to be near enough to you to really make use of the wings in most common scenarios is just, it's kind of it's a really cool ability, like it looks awesome, but it just doesn't function very well in most scenarios. Now, in my opinion, Divine Veil is just a worse version of Warrior's Shake It Off. Shake It Off is an instant, now keep that in mind, instant 12% of your maximum HP barrier that lasts for 15 seconds and can be buffed to 18%. While it doesn't last as long as Divine Veil, the fact that it doesn't have to be procced off of a heal is actually a bigger deal than you might think. I just wish it didn't need to be procced off healing, but if that's the case, then it's just it's still just the worst version of Shake, because it's 2% less mitigation, or 8 depending, which, 2% less mitigation isn't really a big deal in the grand scheme of things. 4% more so, 6%, 8%, that's when it starts to be like kind of a big deal, is the 6 and 8%. And I kind of spoke about this in my Gunbreaker video, where I felt like in that video, Gunbreaker's oh shit button is literally just a different version, a worse version of Hallowed Ground. It's just Hallowed Ground except a shorter duration, and you go down to 1 health. And I feel like Divine Veil and Shake It Off are kind of in the same boat. They do the same thing, except Shake It Off is just better at doing it, which is actually kind of weird, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but Shake It Off was introduced in Stormblood, and I'm like 99% sure that Divine Veil has been in the game since Heaven's Ward. So I just wish they did something to kind of differentiate these two abilities more. It's just, one is just a worse version of the other, which I guess is okay, Not every job should have all the tools necessary to do everything, otherwise you would just bring that one job. But in this case, they're so similar, it's like, why is one just objectively worse? I don't know, maybe it's some sort of balancing thing, but to me it just feels weird. Not to mention, sometimes it can be kind of hard to try and time this ability to go off for a certain AoE. You have to pop it, know the AoE is coming up beforehand, have your healer heal you, and then make sure that they don't take any other damage in the meantime to get rid of the shield to have it actually work. So it's just feels like you gotta jump through so many hoops to get this ability to do what you want. It's like, why can't I just press the frickin' button and have it work, Oh, and Clemency, I actually almost forgot to talk about this, which I don't know how, because this ability is freaking awesome. This spell literally saves lives, saves wipes. It's insane. Obviously it's not the best ability in the game, but there's just so many times where someone should have died, like a healer should have died, and you just Clemency them real quick, and then they don't die, and you don't lose your healer, and then they can res the other healer who's dead, because for some reason one's always dead. And just, oh man, this ability is great, especially since you can instant cast it now. This ability is awesome. The last thing I'm gonna actually end up complaining about before I kind of give like my verdict and kind of wrap this up is the oath gauge. I was really expecting to see this changed so that it doesn't fill up with auto attacks and it fills up with weapon skills, especially since ninjas got that treatment. You know, after they hit 76, their Ninki gauge fills up when they land weapon skills instead of auto attacks. And I really feel like Paladin should get the same treatment. It's just so boring. Just like waiting for it to arbitrarily fill up over time with auto attacks. It's just so boring. I know in actuality, like having it fill up with weapon skills doesn't necessarily change how it functions, but at least it'll be kind of more rewarding to use your gauge spending abilities because you actually had to do something to get that gauge, and you could plan out your gauge more because you know how much of the bar you're gonna fill up. It's just, I really think they should change this. It's not the end of the world, but I really feel like it would just make the job more exciting. You know, waiting for auto attacks to fill up this gauge to then just spend it, like it's just boring. You know, I keep saying it, but it's just so boring. And speaking of waiting for auto attacks, the worst thing ever is when you need to cover or intervention or Sheltron or whatever the case may be, and you can't because you're at like 40 or 45 gauge, and you're just like waiting for your character to auto attack, and they just don't auto attack in time, and then you can't use the ability that you need. It's just, I really hope they change it. Like, I really hope. I don't think they're going to mid-expansion because they'd have to figure out all the values and stuff, and it would change the job a bit and how people play it. But I would, at least for the next expansion, like I would really like to see them change this. I really think it's a missed opportunity. So it's time for my ending thoughts, and I gotta say, Paladin's doing pretty freaking great right now. The job honestly can just do it all. It's got great AoE now. It's got a more interesting and engaging damage rotation. It's got a myriad of defensive tools and party mitigation, albeit some of it isn't the easiest to access, but it kind of feels like Paladin's like the guy in the block who just has their life together. I wouldn't be too surprised to see some slight potency reductions to Paladin coming in the near future. Just because from what I've seen and what I've heard, it's doing pretty solid in the damage department, and it's also the tankiest of the 4 tanks, so Square might want to kind of tone back its damage a bit. I don't think it is like, you know, god tier, the best tank, you have to take it, it's crazy good, like, oh my god, all hail Paladin. But I think it is a little bit stronger. It kind of edges ahead of the other tanks a bit, in my opinion, so I wouldn't be surprised to not see them change anything, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see them nerf a little bit here and there. In terms of if Paladin is a better main tank or off tank, I think it edges out slightly as a main tank, just because Sheltron is just so good. But it can do either role totally fine, just like all the tanks. But Shadowbringers has definitely been pretty kind to Paladin. So those are my thoughts on Paladin. Thank you to everyone who has made it this far in the video, and if you like this kind of content, feel free to hit the like and subscribe buttons. I plan on doing Warrior and Dark Knight as well, probably Dark Knight next, ? Not sure yet. And probably Ninja as well at some point, just because I think it's in a really weird spot as of the recording of this video. Thank you again, and I'll catch you all in the next one.